History is more than just a story. It is a recurring pattern of the power, order, political systems, key figures, and behaviors of states. For someone who wishes to understand today, it is a great source of knowledge and a cumulative reflection of states and their affairs, respectively, with each other. As we enter the second quarter of the 21st century within the era of internet, AI, and the globalism of capital, it is possible for us to see some similar patterns throughout history. In the whole history of humankind, Asia has been the dominant center of power, even though different civilizations took the lead. Yet looking to the recent history, we clearly see a West European dominance for about 500 years, then the 50 years of absolute hegemony of the US. As we witness today's situation, we can clearly see the signs of the police role of the US declines. Brussels norms can't help themselves anymore. The power shifts to Asia once again, but this time in a multipolar and highly distributed system rather than a single hegemon, makes the regional powers more important than ever. Brazil, Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia. Today we are looking at another key player, Türkiye. If you ask me, Türkiye's importance for world powers didn't change much compared to 100 years ago in terms of geopolitics and geostrategy. Having Turkey as an ally is good, but the real cost is the possibility of having Turkey on the other side. 100 years ago, West-centric powers didn't wish to see Türkiye on the communist side. 50 years ago, they imposed a 3-year arms embargo on Türkiye for having intervened in Cyprus, yet still kept Türkiye as an ally. And today, as NATO weakens and the European Union crumbles, the post-World War II alliance of the US through NATO, European Union and Türkiye, raises many questions about today's policies of Türkiye and the region. Rather than what those questions are, let's take a glimpse of Türkiye's geography. Türkiye stretches across the Caucasus, Black Sea, Mesopotamia, Eastern Mediterranean, and Aegean through Anatolia soils. Türkiye also has a foot on Europe geographically through East Thrace soils. Türkiye has one inner sea, the Marmara Sea, which Türkiye holds some significant rights on it through the Montreux Convention. Besides Marmara Sea, Türkiye has coasts on Black Sea, Aegean Sea, Mediterranean Sea. In Black Sea, Türkiye has all the south coastline of Black Sea and enjoys the largest exclusive economic zone in the area. In Mediterranean Sea, Türkiye again takes a large portion of it. The Mediterranean coast length of Syria, Lebanon, Israel, and Egypt combined approximately. Regarding the Aegean Sea, it's highly disputed, yet Türkiye has 2 big islands beside the Dardanelles Strait and small islands close to its coastline, and takes a large portion again, alongside Greece. In terms of water, Türkiye again holds an important strategic position. While its neighbors face severe water shortages, especially in the Middle East, Türkiye has big dams and large portions of water sources, especially via Euphrates and Tigris rivers. Beyond its land and water, Türkiye sits on key energy and migration routes. Pipelines and transit corridors link east and west while migration flows from the Middle East pass through its territory. These factors, combined with its diverse geography and rich water resources, make Türkiye strategically crucial in the region, especially given the military conflicts and proxy tensions around its borders. With a strong military and active diplomacy, Türkiye can gain huge national interest within its region. After the Assad regime falls, outside powers will likely try to project their influence onto Syria's new regime, making the shift from a 13-year civil war to a much more destructive proxy war the most probable scenario. In northern Syria, Turkish troops and Türkiye-backed groups are already part of the landscape. In the northeast, the US-backed Kurdish forces remain in control of large areas. The south is shaped by Israel's presence in the Golan Heights and its claim of protecting Druze communities. Along the coast, Russia maintains its military presence, and Iran-linked Hezbollah remains active through Lebanon. Russia is not only present on the ground, but has also expanded its military production capacity through the war in Ukraine. At the same time, Kurdish militias in the northeast continue to act independently from any central Syrian authority, which keeps the risk of border tensions alive with Türkiye. Separately, the camps holding ISIS detainees remain under Kurdish control, including fighters originating from Europe and the US, a factor that gives these groups leverage over the West while keeping the risk of security problems for Türkiye. There's also the possibility that Turkish and Israeli interests in Syria may clash, turning behind-the-scenes tensions into something more direct. Türkiye is not in a weak position as it moves into this phase. Its military forces are already inside Syria, the army is experienced, and the geography along the border is largely flat and familiar terrain for Turkish operations. This gives Türkiye a clear advantage in any potential military move. As the US gradually shifts its focus away from the Middle East, Türkiye finds more room to maneuver and fewer external constraints on its decision-making. On top of that, Türkiye's exclave presence, the Suleiman Shah tomb, gives Türkiye additional leverage when Syria's future is discussed in legal and diplomatic terms. In the Caucasus, the regional balance is quietly but clearly shifting. Georgia, which directly confronted Russia and lost control over parts of its territory, and Armenia, which failed to receive meaningful Russian military support during the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War and was defeated by Azerbaijan within a short period with Türkiye's backing, are no longer shaping their foreign policies around Moscow. Instead, both countries are increasingly turning toward Europe, broader international engagement, and most importantly, their immediate neighbors. Governments weakened by war fatigue and internal protests are now prioritizing economic stability and bilateral agreements over ideological diplomacy. Armenia stands out in this transition, despite being landlocked and having closed land borders with two of its four neighbors for political reasons. Yerevan has chosen to pursue normalization with Azerbaijan under US mediation and to reopen channels with Türkiye. The decision to resume mutual commercial flights, and especially the announcement of direct Istanbul-Yerevan flights by Turkish Airlines starting in March 2026, represents a notable regional development rather than a symbolic gesture. In a region with harsh climate conditions and limited population, Türkiye's relatively large market, demographic weight, and logistical capacity place it in a position to lead in agriculture, trade, construction, and technology, potentially becoming a driver of regional economic recovery. Normalization between Armenia, Türkiye, and Azerbaijan could also reshape existing energy and transport frameworks. Long-standing infrastructure, such as the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline, may eventually be adjusted to include Armenia in line with regional needs. Similarly, Armenia's agricultural products, including fruits, vegetables, grains, and wine, could reach European and Middle Eastern markets through Türkiye, making economic interdependence a natural outcome of political normalization. However, Türkiye will face clear challenges in the Caucasus. Russia is unlikely to accept a loss of influence without political and diplomatic resistance. At the same time, pressure from the Armenian diaspora on governments seeking pragmatic engagement may complicate decision-making in Yerevan. Armenia's gradual shift away from historical claims in favor of normalization with Türkiye and Azerbaijan will further strain the balance between domestic politics and external relations, particularly within the Armenia, Türkiye, Azerbaijan, EU, Russia equation. Additionally, Iran's direct confrontations with Israel and the US this year risk increasing the cost and insecurity of regional trade routes. Under such conditions, Türkiye may find itself carrying a heavier economic and political burden than initially expected in order to stabilize and invest in the region. The conventional war between Ukraine and Russia didn't only reveal the military and political capacities of the two countries, it also exposed how NATO and Russia operate in the Black Sea, how their spheres of influence take shape, how escalation is managed, and how new warfare tactics are tested. The most important point here is where the impact of this war becomes most visible along the NATO-Russia equation. That impact is not limited to the battlefield. It is reflected most clearly in the Balkans. Political fragility and internal instability in the Balkans became more pronounced together with the Ukraine-Russia war, especially through rising political tension, influence operations, energy dependence, and deep ethnic tensions. These dynamics didn't emerge overnight. but the war accelerated and sharpened them. The recent imprisonment of the head of the Gagauz Autonomous Region, who was known for having good relations with both Erdogan and Putin, on charges of electoral fraud, clearly shows how regional interests across the EU, Russia, and Türkiye can translate into domestic political outcomes. At the same time, divisions within the European Union have become harder to ignore. While some member states seek to form a solid bloc against Russia, others openly oppose financing the continuation of the war and see no issue in continuing to purchase Russian gas. Combined with signals that the US may reduce its long-term commitment to NATO, this has raised serious questions about where Europe's political and military bloc actually begins and ends. As the Balkans increasingly turn into a zone of competition between NATO and Russia, this dynamic also creates opportunities for Türkiye. While the European Union invests several billion euros into Balkan countries and then absorbs their trained and qualified workforce into Western Europe, many Balkan states are left with declining populations, weakened labor markets, and limited capacity to develop infrastructure or meet housing demand. The absence of national currencies in many of these countries has also pushed them into deeper debt cycles. In this context, Türkiye could leverage its diplomatic capital and demographic capacity to offer alternative forms of cooperation. With direct borders to Greece and Bulgaria, Türkiye has geographic continuity into the Balkans and can open commercial and bilateral channels for countries that feel politically constrained within the European Union. There are, however, clear disadvantages. The strong political influence of the European Union and the US may limit Türkiye's diplomatic room for maneuver. Russia's leverage through energy and natural resources could also work against Turkish interests, especially along the energy and infrastructure axis. Despite potential win-win dynamics, historical memory linked to the Ottoman past and Brussels' reluctance to see Türkiye as a dominant actor in the Balkans may continue to restrict Türkiye's initiatives in the region. When we think about modern Türkiye's political journey of more than 100 years, we can see two major allies, the US and Europe. Even though the US has been signaling that NATO may no longer function in the same way, it is still clear that Türkiye remains a very important ally for the US. As the world moves toward a multipolar order, major actors increasingly prioritize realpolitik over ideology. At this point, Türkiye's strategic value becomes more visible. First of all, Türkiye hosts critical NATO and American facilities with the capacity to simultaneously monitor the Middle East, Iran, the Caucasus, and the Black Sea. In addition to this, the Turkish military has extensive operational experience in the Middle East, including operations conducted across thousands of cave networks. It has developed strong expertise in counterterrorism and urban guerrilla warfare, alongside growing military R&D capacity and an expanding operation footprint. Taken together, these factors make Turkey as a balancing and restraining actor against other regional players. Because Türkiye operates within the Western-centered bloc through NATO, while at the same time maintaining neutral and balanced relations with actors outside that bloc, it becomes increasingly important for the US that is trying to redesign its own position and role within a shifting global system. Previous examples already point in this direction. Ukraine and Russia holding peace talks in Istanbul, as well as the recent successful hostage exchanges carried out in Türkiye, involving both the US and Russian citizens, indicate that Turkey is likely to remain a key diplomatic hub for the US. For Europe, the relationship with Türkiye is also becoming more layered than before. Europe remains the largest market for Türkiye, while the majority of the Turkish diaspora lives in Europe. Long-standing bureaucratic and diplomatic continuity dating back to the Ottoman period further reinforces Europe's importance for Türkiye. At the same time, Europe's need for Türkiye has also increased. Ongoing proxy wars in the Middle East, instability across the Caucasus and Central Asia, and migration flows toward Europe passing through Türkiye have all highlighted Türkiye's role as a critical intermediary. Compared to Europe, Türkiye's ability to maintain more flexible and balanced relations with multiple actors makes it an increasingly valuable partner. One additional factor that deepens this layered relationship is the fact that the European Union as a political mechanism is itself being questioned. As a result, it is increasingly likely that individual European states will seek more direct and bilateral engagement with Türkiye. While the US and Europe can be seen as two actors whose relations with Türkiye are likely to show a certain level of continuity based on past patterns, it is much harder to make clear judgments when it comes to China. First of all, Chinese diplomacy tends to maintain a calm and relatively neutral posture in most international crises lately. Combined with a budget surplus amounting to hundreds of billions of dollars each year, these factors have allowed China to steadily expand its political influence across different regions. From Africa to South America, and from Europe to the US, this growing influence is increasingly visible. At this point, even if Türkiye and China do not always sit directly across from each other at the diplomatic table, it is safe to say that they will encounter each other more frequently. This is because both by China's trajectory toward becoming a global power and by Türkiye's rising regional significance. In this context, China attaches growing importance to the Middle Corridor project at a time when the US is attempting to confine it within the first island chain, and when maritime trade routes are becoming more risky and costly. These developments have increased the strategic value of the corridor, which passes through regions where Türkiye is seeking to strengthen its relations with independent Turkic states. This makes encounters between Turkey and China in these areas increasingly likely. Yes, 2025 has been marked by imbalances and fragilities within the global system. It has been a year in which the gray areas of international law became more visible, perceptions and facts increasingly intertwined, and political mechanisms were questioned by public more loudly than ever. Despite the many examples around the world that directly concern Türkiye, what ultimately matters at this point is the broader context in which these developments take place. This is my first video. Bye.